In the rolling hills of northern Connecticut, where the landscape is often quiet and unassuming, one structure loomed with an unmistakable sense of finality. Somers State Prison. Its silhouette, stark against the horizon, was a daily reminder to the nearby towns of the power the state held over those within its walls. It was Connecticut's only maximum security facility, a fortress conceived not for redemption, but for the absolute containment of society's most dangerous men. The architecture itself seemed to radiate a cold, unyielding authority. The walls, built of thick, weathered concrete, rose high and unbroken, while the steel doors, each weighing hundreds of pounds, shut with a finality that echoed through the corridors. Every inch of the prison was engineered to extinguish hope. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, disinfectant, and something indefinable, a tension that never quite dissipated. Life here was a daily battle, governed by a code as old as the prison itself. The corridors echoed with the shuffle of feet and the low murmur of voices, punctuated by sudden shouts or the clang of a distant cell door. Despair and aggression hung in the air, seeping into every conversation, every glance. For those sent here, Somers was the end of the line, a place where the outside world faded into memory, and the present was defined by concrete, steel, and the ever-present threat of violence. The prison was a fortress in every sense, its imposing walls and towers designed to repel not just escape, but even the thought of it. The very weather seemed to conspire, with storms often rolling in, amplifying the sense of isolation. The perimeter was a gauntlet of chain link and razor wire, watched by unblinking cameras and patrolled by guards who trusted no one. Two towering fences, bristling with sharpened metal, encircled the compound, creating a deadly no-man's land where even the bravest hesitated to tread. 7 guard towers loomed over the grounds, each manned by officers with rifles and orders to shoot without hesitation. At night, searchlights cut through the darkness, ensuring that no corner was left unseen. A mobile patrol vehicle circled the grounds relentlessly, its headlights slicing through the gloom, while guard dogs prowled the perimeter, their senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. This layered security was not just physical, it was psychological. Every measure, every barrier was a message. Hope was futile, and freedom was a fantasy best forgotten. Within the walls, the danger was as real as the fences outside. Tension simmered in every interaction, every shared glance, every whispered conversation. Somers was infamous for its violence. Gangs ruled the shadows, their influence felt in every corner, their symbols etched into skin and memory alike. Confrontations erupted over territory, respect, or the smallest of possessions. Stabbings were common, and the threat of sudden violence was a constant companion. Fights could break out anywhere, the chow hall, the recreation yard, or even in the supposed safety of a cell block. There was no warning, only the sudden chaos of survival. In these moments the line between order and anarchy blurred, and the true nature of Somers revealed itself. The guards, outnumbered and always alert, maintained a fragile peace through intimidation, swift punishment, and the ever-present threat of force. For inmates, survival meant constant vigilance, watching for threats from every direction, never letting their guard down, not even for a moment. In this crucible of violence and despair, thousands of men served their sentences, each day blending into the next in a relentless cycle. The daily routine was unyielding, head counts, lockdowns, and the ever-present threat of conflict. The monotony was broken only by moments of fear or fleeting hope. The future was a distant, almost unimaginable concept, overshadowed by the immediate need to survive another day. Time moved differently here, slow, grinding, and merciless. Each man was left alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The system was designed to break a man's spirit, to erase his identity until he was nothing more than a number, a face in the crowd, a forgotten soul. For most, this reality was accepted with a grim resignation, a surrender to the crushing weight of the institution. But for a rare few, the relentless oppression of summers did not extinguish their spirit. Instead, it sparked a desperate, burning desire for freedom, a desire that would set the stage for an audacious escape no one thought possible. In the labyrinthine world of Summer's correctional facility, two men stood out, not for their similarities, but for the stark differences that defined them. Ronald Rutan and Frank Vandever, whose fates collided in this unforgiving place, were as different as night and day, yet their destinies became inextricably linked by a single burning desire: escape. Rutan and Vandever were an odd pairing, their backgrounds and personalities clashing at every turn. Yet in the crucible of prison life, their differences became the very foundation of their alliance. Ronald Rutan, Ronnie to the few who dared to know him, was a man shaped by hardship. His 19-year sentence for robberies and drug possession was only the latest chapter in a life marked by survival. Rutan was the embodiment of discretion. He moved through the prison with a kind of invisible grace, never drawing attention, always watching. He understood the unspoken rules, the shifting alliances, the silent threats, and he navigated them with a careful, almost surgical precision. His job in the kitchen was more than a means to pass the time. It was his lifeline. The kitchen gave him access to food, yes, but also to information, to favours, to the subtle economy that thrived behind bars. Rutan's resilience was quiet but unbreakable. He was a man who could wait, who could endure, who could plan for months, if that's what it took. Frank Vandever, by contrast, was a man who had once commanded boardrooms and brokered million-dollar deals. His fall from grace was as spectacular as it was tragic. Once a respected stockbroker, Vandever now wore the same drab uniform as the men he'd once looked down upon. His crime, a brazen embezzlement followed by a cold-blooded murder, had shocked even the most hardened inmates, but prison had not dulled his charisma. Vandever was a master manipulator, a man who could read a room in seconds and bend it to his will. He traded stock tips for privileges, spun stories for sympathy, and always seemed to know more than he let on. His relationships with the guards were transactional, calculated. He offered them glimpses of the outside world, financial advice, rumours, even hope, in exchange for small luxuries and, more importantly, information. Vandever's flamboyance set him apart. He was unafraid to challenge norms, sometimes donning women's clothing with a defiant flair that unsettled both inmates and staff. It was a calculated risk, one that made him unforgettable and sometimes untouchable. Their personalities could not have been more different. Rutan, the silent observer, trusted no one. Vandever, the consummate performer, trusted only himself. Rutan's mind was always working, cataloguing routines, memorizing guard shifts, noting every crack in the system. He was a planner, a man who believed in preparation above all else. He moved through the prison like a shadow, never leaving a trace, never giving anyone a reason to remember him. Rutan's Pruno was legendary, a potent brew that brought him loyalty and secrets. It was his currency, his leverage, his way of building a network without ever raising his voice. He thrived in the gritty, unforgiving reality of prison, adapting to every hardship with quiet ingenuity. Vandever, meanwhile, was a force of nature. He could turn a hostile crowd into an audience, a suspicious guard into an ally. His confidence was magnetic, his ambition boundless. Where Rutan saw obstacles, Vandever saw opportunities. He viewed the guards not as jailers, but as potential assets, tools to be used, pieces to be moved. His self-assurance bordered on arrogance, but it was this very trait that allowed him to dream up schemes others wouldn't dare imagine. Out of necessity, these two men, so different, so unlikely, formed a partnership. It was not friendship, but a calculated alliance, each recognizing in the other a missing piece. Rutan brought the patience, the hands-on skill, the ability to work in silence for hours on end. He could turn scraps into tools, rumours into plans. He knew the rhythms of the prison, the moments when eyes turned away, the seconds when doors were left unguarded. Vandever brought the vision, the resources and the audacity. He had connections, hidden stashes, and a mind that never stopped scheming. Rutan needed Vandever's daring and his access to contraband. Vandever needed Rutan's steady hand and deep knowledge of the prison's underbelly. Alone, they were just two more men lost in the system, haunted by regrets and dreams of freedom. But together they became something more, a team forged by necessity, sharpened by adversity, and driven by the hope of a life beyond the walls. Their partnership was a study in contrasts, but it was also their greatest strength. In the relentless monotony of Summers Correctional, the idea of escape is more than a fantasy. It's a lifeline, a secret hope that keeps the mind sharp and the spirit from breaking. For Ronald Rutan, sentenced to 19 years, the walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing day. The notion of escape was no longer a distant dream. It became a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. He spent countless hours replaying every detail of his daily routine, searching for cracks in the system, for moments when the guards' vigilance wavered. His job in the kitchen, though menial, offered a rare vantage point. He watched the rhythm of the staff, the timing of deliveries, the way garbage was handled and removed. The first plan he considered was crude but tempting. Hide inside a 55-gallon barrel of food waste, let himself be wheeled out with the trash, and hope for a miracle on the other side. But the more he thought about it, the more the flaws became obvious. The barrels were checked, sometimes even poked with metal rods. The risk of suffocation or being crushed was real and terrifying. He abandoned the garbage barrel scheme, but the urge to escape only grew stronger, gnawing at him in the quiet hours before dawn. It was during these restless days that Rutan noticed Frank Vandever, a man whose reputation for cleverness preceded him. Vandever was different. He didn't just talk about escape, he moved with purpose, always scanning, always calculating. Vandever's plan was intricate, almost elegant. He believed brute force was a fool's errand. What they needed was finesse, patience, and a willingness to exploit the smallest weaknesses. His vision was to go through the barriers, literally. Not over, not under, but through, using tools smuggled in piece by piece, hidden in plain sight. Vandever had spent months observing the workshop windows, noting which ones were least visible to the guards, which ones had the oldest, most corroded bars. His idea was to cut through the steel bars of a carefully chosen window, using makeshift tools crafted from kitchen scraps and stolen workshop parts, then slip out under cover of darkness and breach the two perimeter fences, each with their own deadly obstacles. The plan demanded patience, absolute secrecy, and nerves of steel. One mistake, one loose word, and the whole thing would collapse. When Rutan finally learned the details of Vandever's plan, it was as if a door had opened in his mind. For the first time, escape felt possible, if only they could trust each other. Compared to the garbage barrel, Vandever's approach was a revelation. It was methodical, adaptable, and most importantly, survivable. Together they began to gather what they needed: bits of wire, scraps of metal, even soap to muffle the sound of sawing at night. The alliance was sealed in secrecy. Vandever brought the vision and the contacts, guards who could be bribed, inmates who owed favours. Rutan brought the discipline, the ability to blend in, and a relentless attention to detail that would prove invaluable. Rutan's kitchen job allowed him to move unnoticed, to smuggle small items and gather intelligence on guard rotations. Their shared goal was simple, but the stakes were life and death. Escape Summers, whatever it took. Vandever's plan didn't end at the prison walls. He had a destination, a future mapped out in detail. He confided in Rutan. Once free, they would vanish into the chaos of New York City, where old contacts and new opportunities awaited. Vandever claimed a former associate owed him a fortune, $25,000, enough to buy new identities and a fresh start. With that money they could secure fake passports and credentials, disappear into the city's endless crowds, and make their way south, all the way to Mexico, where the law would have a harder time following. For Rutan, who had always focused on the mechanics of escape, Vandever's vision gave him something new, a reason to believe in life after Summers. The plan was no longer just about breaking out. It was about breaking free from the first cut of a steel bar to the promise of a new life under the Mexican sun. The seed of an idea, once fragile and uncertain, had now grown into a daring, meticulously crafted plan, one that would test their courage, their cunning, and their trust in each other. Every great escape hinges on more than just courage and cunning. It demands the right instruments, the silent partners in any bid for freedom. For Rutan and Vandever, the first and most daunting obstacle was simple, unyielding steel, bars, mesh and wire, all designed to keep hope at bay. Vandever, ever the strategist, recognized that brute force alone would never suffice. Ingenuity would be their greatest weapon. He cultivated a rapport with a particular guard, a man who fancied himself a stock market savant, eager for tips and inside knowledge. With patience and subtlety, Vandever made his move, requesting a favour that seemed harmless enough. He claimed a desire to take up running in the yard, explaining that a new pair of sneakers would help him pass the time and stay out of trouble. The guard, eager to maintain his lucrative source of financial advice, agreed to the request, never suspecting the true purpose behind it. Hidden within the thick rubber soles, two hacksaw blades lay nestled, small, sharp, and perfectly suited for slicing through steel. Smuggling the blades inside was only half the battle. The next test was concealment, for discovery would mean disaster. Random shakedowns were a daily threat, and the men knew that even a moment's carelessness could cost them everything. The penalty for contraband was severe: solitary confinement, extended sentences, and the end of any hope for escape. Rutan, assigned to the waste room, saw opportunity where others saw only filth and neglect. A forgotten ventilation shaft, its opening obscured by years of grime, became their secret cache, a place invisible to even the most thorough search. The hacksaw blades, their first ticket to freedom, were hidden away, waiting for the night when silence and darkness would be their allies. But the window bars were only the beginning. Beyond them loomed two towering fences, each topped with razor wire and patrolled by watchful eyes. For these, they would need something far more formidable, a pair of industrial bolt cutters capable of snapping thick steel like twigs. Acquiring such a tool was a logistical nightmare. Its size made it nearly impossible to hide, and its absence from the workshop would be quickly noticed. Once again, Vandever's resourcefulness came to the fore. He pooled together a small fortune, $125, a king's ransom behind bars. The money changed hands in whispers and shadows, each bill a silent promise of freedom. Rutan, leveraging his connections, arranged for the bolt cutters to be procured from a prisoner with access to the workshop's forbidden treasures. The next hurdle, smuggling the unwieldy cutters into their domain. The solution was as bold as it was risky. A food cart laden with supplies would serve as their Trojan horse. Concealed beneath trays of bland prison fare, the bolt cutters made their journey through the labyrinthine halls. Rutan's pulse thundered in his ears as he pushed the cart, every step a gamble, every glance from a guard a potential end. At the checkpoint, fate seemed poised to intervene. A guard stepped forward, intent on a thorough search. In that suspended moment, the entire plot teetered on the edge of ruin, but luck, or perhaps destiny, intervened. Just as the search was about to begin, the guard was summoned away, an urgent request for coffee from the warden himself. With a wave, the cart was allowed through, the danger passing as quickly as it had appeared. At last, Rutan secured the bolt cutters in the waste room, their final and most vital tool hidden in the shadows, proof that with enough wit and nerve, even the most impossible barriers could be breached. With their tools secured, the real work began. But this was no ordinary labour. This was the birth of a clandestine operation hidden in plain sight. The escape was staged from the waste room, a cramped, chaotic space where Ronald Rutan spent his days sorting through the detritus of prison life. The air was thick with the scent of old food, rust, and the faint tang of cleaning chemicals. This unassuming room became their secret workshop, a sanctuary of whispered plans and silent determination. Here, Rutan and Vandiver would methodically dismantle a piece of the prison itself, all while guards and other inmates bustled just outside the door. Their first priority was to create a blind spot, a way to work undetected even as guards made their rounds. The door to the waste room had a small window, and guards would often peer inside, their eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. To block this view, Rutan and Vandiver began meticulously stacking large cardboard boxes and empty food barrels against the wall, creating a shield that concealed the window they intended to cut. Every box was placed with purpose, every barrel angled just so. This wall of refuse looked perfectly natural in a waste room, arousing no suspicion from even the most observant guard. Only after nightfall, when the prison settled into uneasy silence and the guards locked them in, did the real work begin. They started the painstaking process of cutting through the thick steel bars of the window, their hands steady but their hearts pounding. The sound of the hacksaw blade grinding against metal was dangerously loud in the quiet of the prison. Every stroke sent a jolt of fear through their bodies. Every scrape and screech seemed to echo, threatening to alert a passing guard. The risk was constant, the tension unrelenting. To solve this problem, Vandiver, ever resourceful, used vegetable oil smuggled from the kitchen, a simple yet ingenious solution. By applying the oil to the blade and the bar, they were able to significantly dampen the noise, reducing the harsh grinding to a much quieter, more manageable hiss. The difference was immediate and vital. This simple trick was crucial, allowing them to work with less fear of being overheard. Still, every moment was a gamble. Their work was slow and arduous, taking place over many nights. Fatigue set in, but the drive to escape kept them going. But an even greater challenge was hiding their progress from daytime inspections. Every morning they had to erase the evidence of their nocturnal labour. A partially sawn bar would be an immediate giveaway, a death sentence for their plan. Once again they devised an ingenious solution, drawing on every ounce of creativity and desperation. After each session of cutting, they would carefully smear peanut butter into the grooves they had made, blending the colour and texture with the rusty bars. The colour and texture of the peanut butter perfectly matched the weathered surface of the old prison bars, making the cuts nearly invisible. To a casual observer, the bar looked untouched, just another piece of neglected ironwork in a forgotten room. This clever camouflage allowed them to leave their work in plain sight, confident that it would pass any routine inspection by the guards. Each successful inspection was a small victory. Their system was nearly foolproof, but the risk of discovery was ever present. Every sound, every shadow, every unexpected footstep sent a jolt of fear through the workshop. One evening, as they were hard at work, their worst fears were realized. The air seemed to freeze as the doorknob rattled. The door to the waste room suddenly opened, and 2 guards entered for a surprise inspection. The room was instantly charged with panic. Rutan and Vandever froze, certain they were caught. Every muscle tensed, every breath held. But the guards' attention was immediately drawn to something else. A small, suspicious jar in the corner. In a corner, they discovered a jar of Rutan's homemade prison wine, or pruno. The illicit brew was a minor offence compared to what was really happening. Delighted with their find, the guards confiscated the illicit brew and reprimanded Rutan, completely oblivious to the far more serious crime being committed just a few feet away. The guards left, satisfied with their minor bust, leaving the 2 inmates shaken but with their master plan still intact. The secret workshop had survived another day, its true purpose hidden behind layers of grit, wit, and sheer nerve. The night of the escape was chosen with tactical precision. They needed to move after the evening meal, when the kitchen area quieted down, but before the final 9:30 head count that would lock every inmate in their cell for the night. This gave them a narrow, high-stakes window of opportunity. As the prison began to settle into its nightly rhythm, Rutan and Vandever made their final preparations. With the guards' routines timed and their tools at the ready, they returned to the window in their secret workshop. The last few strands of steel holding the bars in place were quickly sawn through. With a final, quiet effort, they bent the bars open, creating a gap just large enough to squeeze through. Climbing out of the window, they dropped silently into the prison yard. The air was cold and still, heavy with the tension of the moment. Before them lay 36 meters of open ground, a terrifying expanse of grass and dirt illuminated by the harsh glare of the prison lights. This was the most vulnerable part of their journey. They had to cross this space to reach the first of the 2 perimeter fences, all while avoiding the sweeping gaze of the guards in the 7 towers and the headlights of the mobile patrol. Moving low and fast, they sprinted across the yard, their hearts pounding with every step, until they reached the relative cover of the first fence. There they encountered their first major setback. The chain link of the fence was thicker and stronger than they had anticipated. Frank Vandever put the bolt cutters to the wire and squeezed, but the tool failed to make a dent. At that moment, the headlights of the mobile patrol vehicle swept across their position. They flattened themselves against the ground, holding their breath, praying they would remain unseen in the shadows. The patrol passed without stopping. Shaken, Rutan realized they needed more leverage. He positioned the cutters and threw his entire body weight onto the handles. The wire snapped with a loud crack, a sound like a firecracker exploding in the night silence. The sharp noise immediately drew the attention of a nearby guard, who came out of his post to investigate. Rutan and Vandever froze, convinced their luck had run out. But the guard saw nothing in the darkness and eventually returned to his station. They had survived, but time was rapidly running out. The prison-wide announcement for the 9 o'clock return to cells blared over the loudspeakers, a stark reminder that they had only 20 minutes left before the final head count would reveal their absence. Working frantically, Vandever refined their technique, twisting the wires back and forth after making an initial cut, which allowed them to break through more quietly and efficiently. They finally cut a hole large enough to crawl through, just as the 9:30 head count began. Crawling through the hole, they glanced back nervously, aware that any noise could spell disaster. They moved cautiously towards the second fence, every step calculated to avoid detection. Vandever's hands trembled as he cut through the second fence, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold. They squeezed through the second fence, their eyes darting around for any sign of movement. With freedom in sight, they ran towards the dark forest, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Disappearing into the forest, the moonlight filtering through the trees, they knew the hardest part was yet to come. Having breached the first fence, Rutan and Vandever felt a surge of hope, their hearts pounding in their chests as they sprinted into the unknown. They darted across the perilous open ground, every step echoing with the risk of discovery, the second and final barrier looming ahead. Now, in the infamous shoot-to-kill zone, the air was thick with danger. One wrong move could mean the end. The seconds felt like hours as they rushed forward, knowing the prison would soon erupt in chaos. When they reached the second fence, dread washed over them, their path to freedom blocked by a menacing tangle of razor wire. The wire glinted in the harsh light, a deadly web that threatened to shred any hope of escape. Panic clawed at their resolve as precious seconds slipped away, the weight of failure pressing down. Their carefully laid plans teetered on the brink of collapse, the taste of freedom almost snatched away. In a flash of desperate ingenuity, Vandever dropped to his knees, searching for any weakness at the fence's base. His fingers found a thin, pliable wire, an overlooked flaw in the prison's armour. With trembling hands, they worked the bolt cutters, slicing through the wire with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The flaw was almost invisible, a tiny oversight that now meant everything. Fueled by adrenaline, they tore at the weak spot, carving a narrow escape route just as alarms began to wail. Sirens blared, slicing through the night as they wriggled through the gap, scraping their skin but not daring to slow down. Suddenly, they were outside the fence, beyond the reach of the prison walls. For the first time in years they were truly free, yet freedom felt nothing like they'd imagined. Their bodies trembled with shock, fear, and a wild rush of adrenaline. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow a threat. Behind them, the prison exploded into chaos, sirens, shouts, and the pounding of boots echoing through the night. Searchlights swept the fields, slicing through the darkness in frantic arcs, hunting for any sign of movement. Rutan and Vandever ran, glancing back with every step, their ears straining for the sound of pursuit. They didn't dare stop, their legs pumping as they vanished into the night, driven by the primal urge to survive. The woods swallowed them, branches clawing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them as they crashed through the undergrowth. Far ahead, the faint glow of Enfield shimmered through the trees, a beacon of hope, but also a reminder of how far they still had to go. Exhaustion gnawed at them, but fear kept them moving, stumbling blindly through the pitch-black forest. The baying of hounds grew louder, a chilling soundtrack to their desperate flight. The prison's canine units, relentless and expertly trained, were unleashed, closing the gap with every passing second. Rutan and Vandever's lungs burned, their muscles screamed, but the terror of capture drove them onward, deeper into the night. Suddenly, the trees parted and they stumbled onto a deserted highway, the world opening up before them. For a moment they froze, hearts hammering, scanning the empty road. No headlights, no shouts, just the hum of distant traffic. The air was thick with the scent of asphalt and exhaust, a confusing blend that masked their trail from the dogs. When the canine teams reached the intersection, the dogs circled, confused, unable to pick up the scent. For the first time, Rutan and Vandever allowed themselves to breathe. Relief washed over them, mingled with disbelief. The world felt impossibly vast and open, every breath of cool night air a reminder that they were no longer prisoners. But freedom was raw and uncertain. Each step forward was a leap into the unknown, their journey only just beginning. The first taste of freedom was a cold, biting wind that cut through their thin prison uniforms. Rutan and Vandever, hearts pounding, found themselves thrust into a world that felt both familiar and utterly alien. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every distant siren a harbinger of doom. The night was a gauntlet of close calls. At one point, a police cruiser rolled by, its headlights sweeping dangerously close. The fugitives pressed themselves into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. Hunger gnawed at them, and they scavenged what little they could find, sharing scraps with a stray dog that seemed to understand their desperation. Seeking shelter, they slipped into an abandoned warehouse, where Rutan tended to a nasty scrape on Vandiver's arm. The wound was minor, but the risk of infection loomed large in their minds. They whispered plans, voices barely above a breath, as the city around them began to stir. As dawn broke, they watched office workers arrive, searching for a way inside. When a janitor unlocked a side door, the fugitives seized their chance, slipping in unnoticed and hiding among the maze of cubicles. Hours passed in tense silence. When two cleaners began their rounds, Rutan and Vandiver confronted them. Desperation etched on their faces. The cleaners, startled but unharmed, were tied up with curtain cords, reassured that no harm would come if they cooperated. With the keys to a work truck in hand, the fugitives changed into stolen jackets, hoping to pass as maintenance workers. Every step toward the exit felt like a gamble with fate. Once on the road, they plotted a route to New York City, avoiding highways and sticking to back roads. The stolen truck was both a blessing and a curse, mobility at the cost of constant fear of discovery. Their journey was a series of near misses. At one checkpoint they narrowly avoided detection when officers were distracted by another vehicle. Each encounter left them more paranoid, more determined to stay invisible. Sleep came in short, restless bursts. They took turns keeping watch, haunted by the fear of being caught off guard. At a deserted gas station they risked using a stolen credit card, knowing it might leave a trail. Food was scarce and unappetizing, but hunger left them little choice. They argued quietly about their next steps, the stress of the journey beginning to fray their nerves. When a police car pulled in behind them at a fast food lot, time seemed to stop. The officer, oblivious, went inside for his meal, and the fugitives seized the moment to escape, hearts racing. Realizing the truck's license plate was a liability, they drove to a crowded mall and swapped plates with a similar vehicle, hoping to buy themselves precious time. Every precaution was taken, wiping down surfaces, changing their appearance, blending into the flow of city traffic as they finally crossed into New York. In the city they ditched the truck and took to the subways, blending in with the crowds. Vandiver, ever resourceful, bought a cheap wig and sunglasses while Rutan kept watch for any sign of pursuit. Meanwhile, law enforcement was closing in. The FBI coordinated with local police, reviewing hours of surveillance footage and following up on dozens of tips, many of which were dead ends. The unusual detail of Vandiver's penchant for disguises led to a flood of reported sightings, but the fugitives remained elusive, always one step ahead. For 16 days, Rutan and Vandiver survived on their wits, improvising at every turn. They slept in abandoned buildings, trusted no one, and relied on each other as they navigated the labyrinth of the city, always aware that the world was hunting them. The fugitives' luck, which had carried them so far, was about to run out. For 16 days, Ronald Rutan and Frank Vandiver had evaded capture, their every step shadowed by uncertainty and fear. But as dusk settled over upstate New York, the air itself seemed to thicken with inevitability. The break in the case came not from a dramatic police chase, but from an observant citizen. In a town where everyone knew each other's business, even the smallest oddity stood out. The manager of a modest roadside motel had grown uneasy about a new guest, his instincts sharpened by days of news coverage and whispered rumours. This man, who had checked in identifying himself as a financial consultant, matched the description of Frank Vandiver. His calm demeanour and polished story only deepened the manager's suspicions. The profession he claimed was a direct link to his past life, a detail too perfect to be coincidence. Growing more concerned, the manager looked up the home address the guest had provided on the registration card and discovered it was linked to one of Vandever's relatives. The pieces were falling into place. The manager made a call to the authorities, informing them that the suspicious guest was due to return to the motel at 3 o'clock that day. The fate of the fugitives now rested on the ticking of the clock. Acting on this credible tip, the FBI swiftly organized a stakeout. Every detail was scrutinized, every possible escape route considered. Agents in plain clothes and unmarked cars converged on the motel, setting up a perimeter and waiting patiently. The tension was palpable. The atmosphere was electric. After 16 days of dead ends and false alarms, this felt like a genuine opportunity to bring the manhunt to a close. The agents watched and waited, their eyes fixed on the entrance to the motel parking lot. Every second stretched into eternity. Right on schedule at exactly 3 o'clock, the stolen work truck with the switched license plates pulled in. The trap was set. Ronald Rutan and Frank Vandever had walked directly into a trap, unaware that their freedom was about to vanish. As the two men got out of the truck, the FBI agents made their move, swarming the vehicle from all directions. The parking lot exploded into action. Realizing they were cornered, Rutan and Vandever split up and ran in opposite directions in a last, desperate bid for freedom. The chase was on. Vandever sprinted towards a nearby fence, attempting to climb it as he had done 16 days earlier. But the weight of exhaustion and fate bore down on him. But this time, there would be no escape. His strength failed him at the crucial moment. He stumbled and fell, and before he could recover, agents were on top of him. The fight was over in seconds. He was apprehended immediately, his time as a fugitive over. The realization hit him with crushing finality. His bold plan had ultimately led him right back into the hands of the law. The journey that began with hope ended in resignation. Meanwhile, Ronald Rutan ran down a different path, darting into an alleyway between two buildings. His heart pounded with the last vestiges of hope. He saw a potential escape route ahead, but it was cut off in an instant. The alley, once a promise of freedom, became a dead end. An FBI agent, anticipating his move, had driven a car directly into the alley, blocking his path completely. There was nowhere left to run. Trapped with nowhere left to run, Rutan saw that the chase was over. The silence in the alley was deafening. He stopped, raised his hands, and surrendered without any resistance. The long flight was finished. After 16 days on the run, the Great Connecticut Escape had come to a quiet and inevitable end. The manhunt that had gripped the nation was over, not with a gunfight, but with surrender and silence. The two men who had defied a maximum security prison with their wit and grit were captured, proving that while one can run from prison, it is nearly impossible to run from justice forever. In the days that followed, the story of their escape and capture dominated headlines, sparking debates about security, desperation, and the human will to survive. For Rutan and Vandever, the aftermath was a return to confinement, this time under even stricter watch. For the authorities, it was a hard-won victory, a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. The motel room was left empty, a silent witness to the final act of a desperate journey. Life in the small town slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the great escape lingered in every whispered conversation. In the end, the tale of the Great Connecticut Escape became a story not just of crime and capture, but of the enduring struggle between freedom and fate, a reminder that, no matter how far one runs, the consequences of our choices are never far behind. A Gap 2S. As the dust settled and the headlines faded, the world was left with one lingering question: who were the men behind this daring escape? Beyond the mugshots and news stories, Ronald Rutan and Frank Vandiver were more than fugitives. They were complex individuals, each shaped by a lifetime of choices, regrets and dreams. Ronald Rutan's story began in the working-class neighbourhoods of Bridgeport, Connecticut. As a boy, he was known for his quick wit and restless spirit. But as the years wore on, the pressures of poverty and fractured family ties would carve deep lines in his path. Drawn into petty crime by desperation and the need to belong, Rutan's early missteps snowballed into a series of increasingly serious offences. By the time he entered Somers State Prison, he was no stranger to hard time, or to the feeling of being trapped by forces beyond his control. Frank Vandiver's journey was different, but no less fraught. Born to a family of modest means, he excelled in school, showing a knack for numbers and a talent for persuasion. But the promise of a bright future was derailed by a single, fateful decision, a white-collar crime that spiraled out of control. Vandiver's charm and intelligence, once his greatest assets, became tools of deception. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and soon the man who might have been a financial consultant was instead a convicted felon. In prison, the two men forged an unlikely alliance. Rutan's resourcefulness and Vandiver's careful planning proved a powerful combination. Yet beneath the surface, both men were haunted by the same questions. Was escape a chance at redemption, or just another dead end? Could freedom wipe away the mistakes of the past, or only magnify their cost? Their motivations were as complex as their histories. For Rutan, the escape was a rebellion against the life that had been forced upon him, a final grasp at control. For Vandiver it was a calculated risk, a last-ditch effort to reclaim a sense of agency lost to a single bad choice. The world may remember them as fugitives, but behind the headlines were men shaped by hardship, hope, and the unyielding desire to rewrite their own stories, even if only for 16 days. In the end, their escape was not just from prison walls, but from the labels that had defined them for so long. Gap 2S, the saga of Rutan and Vandiver, is a reminder that every headline hides a human story, one of struggle, longing, and the search for meaning in the face of impossible odds. Gap 2S. While Rutan and Vandiver's escape captured national attention, another story was unfolding behind the prison's concrete walls, one told through the eyes of those who stood watch. For the guards of Somers State Prison, routine was both shield and shackle. Each day began before sunrise, boots echoing in silent corridors, eyes scanning every shadow, every gesture. Their world was governed by order, roll calls, cell checks, and the constant hum of vigilance. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Some guards sensed the subtle shifts. A glance exchanged between inmates, a tool misplaced, a door that seemed just slightly ajar. For Officer Martinez, a 10-year veteran, it was the small things, the way Rutan's cell was always meticulously tidy, or the quiet confidence Vandiver carried, even under scrutiny. There were whispers in the break room, suspicions not yet voiced. When the escape was discovered, disbelief gave way to a surge of adrenaline. Alarms blared, radios crackled, and a wave of questions swept through the ranks. How did this happen on their watch? Some guards felt betrayed, others racked with guilt, replaying every shift in their minds. For many, it was a sobering reminder of the delicate balance between authority and trust, vigilance and fatigue. In the days that followed, the guards became both investigators and witnesses, piecing together clues, retracing steps, and searching for answers in the routines that had lulled them into complacency. Beyond the uniform, they were fathers, mothers, sons and daughters. Ordinary people, tasked with an extraordinary burden. Their story is one seldom told, but vital to understanding the full picture. For while the world focused on the fugitives, it was the guards who bore the weight of accountability, learning, sometimes painfully, that in Somers State Prison every decision, every detail could mean the difference between order and chaos. As news of the escape broke, the world outside Somers State Prison erupted in a frenzy of flashing cameras and urgent headlines. Helicopters hovered overhead, reporters crowded the prison gates, and the story of Rutan and Vandever's daring flight captivated a nation hungry for details. Across living rooms and diner counters, the public debated the meaning of the escape. For some it was a thrilling tale of cunning and audacity, a real-life drama unfolding in their own backyard. For others, it was a chilling reminder of the fallibility of institutions meant to keep society safe. News anchors dissected every angle, speculating on the fugitives' next moves and questioning the competence of prison officials. Editorials called for reform, while talk shows invited former inmates and experts to weigh in. Social media buzzed with theories, memes and armchair investigations, turning the escape into a viral sensation. But beyond the headlines, deeper questions emerged. Was this a symptom of a broken system or an extraordinary exception? Did the escape expose flaws in security or the resilience of the human spirit? Communities near the prison felt a ripple of unease. Parents double-checked locks, local businesses closed early, and police patrols increased. In the days and weeks that followed, the story lingered, a mirror reflecting society's fears, fascinations, and the perennial tension between justice and mercy. The escape had become more than a headline. It was a catalyst, sparking conversations about safety, rehabilitation, and the complex world behind prison walls. And as the world watched, Somers State Prison stood as a symbol of vulnerability, of vigilance, and of the stories that connect us all, both inside and far beyond the bars. In the months and years following the dramatic escape, Somers State Prison and correctional institutions across the country underwent a quiet transformation. The daring flight of Rutan and Vandever left a lasting imprint, not just on headlines, but on the very fabric of prison policy and public consciousness. New security protocols were swiftly implemented, surveillance systems were upgraded, guard rotations became more frequent, and routine inspections intensified. Training programs for staff emphasized vigilance and adaptability, aiming to catch the smallest hint of ingenuity among inmates. Across the state, funding was redirected to reinforce aging infrastructure, and a new culture of transparency emerged, with officials held to greater accountability. Yet the legacy of the escape went deeper than concrete and cameras. Lawmakers launched investigations into the root causes, probing for cracks not just in walls but in the system itself. Debates about rehabilitation versus punishment took on renewed urgency. Some advocated for more humane conditions and education for inmates, believing that hope, not just security, was the key to prevention. Others called for harsher measures, determined to close every conceivable loophole. For the families of those inside, the escape became a symbol of both fear and possibility. Former inmates, inspired or unsettled, shared stories of their own brushes with the system's limits. Advocacy groups seized the moment, pushing for reforms that might prevent desperation from boiling over into audacious acts. Years later, the story of Rutan and Vandever endures in training manuals, policy memos, and whispered legends among prisoners and guards alike. Their escape became a catalyst for change, a reminder that every institution, no matter how fortified, is shaped by the people within it. And while the prison walls now stand taller and stronger, the questions raised by that long night remain, echoing through every locked door and every new headline. How do we balance safety with humanity? How do we build a system that protects without forgetting the lives inside? The answers, like the legacy of the escape, continue to unfold, quietly, persistently, just beyond the walls.